What is up, ladies? Okay, Coach Shawna here, bringing to you I don't remember what week it is. I think this is 2.3, Intra training and comp day nutrition. So this is one of I care about all of them. I love all of them. I love teaching you all about all of them because I think it's so cool. I think nutrition is so awesome for how it works in every part of our lives, especially as women, because our bodies are constantly changing based off of where we are in life. So intra-training comp day nutrition is important because inevitably, as a female in functional fitness or CrossFit, if you're following CFT, you will come across probably either a competition, or perhaps you will have a day where you do one or two workouts back to back. Maybe it'll be a day where you train CrossFit in the morning and then go hike in the afternoon, right? And so this is a conversation that we need to have about how do we coordinate our nutrition around days like this. So I'm going to go into it. Hopefully I don't nerd out too much and I can keep this presentation to a realistic amount of time. And hopefully I'll keep it entertaining while you go through this with me. So why is it important? We've talked so much in the last, I think we're 8 weeks in, but we talked significantly about how integral good nutrition is and how impactful it is to energy, to sleep, to performance, to recovery, right? Well, prioritizing your nutrition around training and then prioritizing it even more if you have long training sessions is super important, because if you have, say, 2 or 3 pieces back to back, say you have 2 lifting segments and a metcon, you want to be able to have energy for that metcon, right? And then you want to be able to have the energy to recover from all that training. So making your nutrition a priority around those long sessions, or for competition day, if you have 3 or 4 workouts back to back, like how do you eat in between workouts so that each workout you can give your all? This is why it's important. It helps with mental clarity and focus. It helps with being able to give 100% for each piece, right? So it's important. It's very important. So for fitness, so we've talked about this already with training for nutrition in general. The first and foremost rule that you need to live by is for every 60 to 90 minutes of fitness, you should be consuming 40 to 60 grams of carbohydrates. So I'm saying 60 to 90 minutes of actual training. If you have 3 pieces that you break up that you could get done in an hour and you break up into 2 hours, then I still only really want you having 40 to 60 grams. If you have 90 to 120 minutes of actual fitness, right? So like that you're only resting 5-10 minutes in between each piece. And then I want you to focus on 40 to 60 grams for each hour. And you're going to play around with it. It depends too on intensity level of your workouts. If you're rest day or recovery day and you're doing 90 minutes of just moving, you don't need as many carbohydrates as, say, if you have, 90% back squats, 80% cleans, and then 2 20-minute AMRAPs, right? So you're going to play around with it. And we are working to develop that confidence so that you can play around with it and you are comfortable with, tweaking things to see what works best for you. And every day is different too, right? All right. So what do those carbohydrates consist of? So high glycemic index foods. I want easily digested with minimal ingredients. What does that mean? It means fruit snacks, things like that. I want foods that you could eat 60 minutes before training and they digest quickly enough that you don't still feel them in your stomach. So I'm going to get into detail on minimizing protein and fats before you train, or like figuring out how to coordinate that around training. But I want you thinking about how quickly is this food going to digest in my system? And you're an adult. You've eaten enough food in your life that when something sits for a long time, Thanksgiving dinner, versus when something digests really fast, a package of Skittles, right? So the package of Skittles is going to be your high glycemic index food. Your Thanksgiving dinner is going to create a lower glucose response, which means that it is a lower glycemic index food or meal in that case. All right. So, high glycemic index foods, whole fruit, white rice, candy, squeezy pouches, baby food, dextrose or carb powder, fruit snacks. So you see on here candy. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I want you to have candy for every training session. However, especially on competition day, if you are extremely nervous and you tend to have an anxious stomach and have a hard time eating, having some Skittles or some Starburst or some gummy bears or something like that is not the worst thing ever. Got to make sure you brush your teeth so you don't get cavities. But it's not going to be the end of the world, right? Because that's not what we do every single day. But we have a specific thing that we're trying to prioritize, and that is our performance on that day, especially competition day. So how can I optimize my performance? Well, that's by providing my body with a very fast source of carbohydrates, aka glucose, right? So high glycemic index carbs break down really fast into glucose, which my body can use to put into the cell to have all the ATP. So if you want to play around with it and see if, having candy or even, like some Swedish fish in a training session, like if you have a hard time digesting foods, I eat bananas in my intra gym or my intra training snacks, but maybe I digest food pretty fast. Maybe you don't, and you need some carbs, and you play around with the dextrose or the carb powder, but you also want to have something else. Having some fruit snacks or some Swedish fish or something like that isn't going to be the worst thing ever, because it has a purpose, right? Like why we eat with intention. We eat with a purpose behind it. So your Swedish fish, they have a purpose in between your training sessions. Now, you do want to be mindful of foods that contain fructose and consuming a high amount of fructose, especially during competition day or say like qualifiers, things like that, because women tend to have a harder time digesting fructose. Interestingly enough, we have in our stomach, we have sugar or carbohydrate receptors. We have different receptors that break down different sugars, and women have less fructose receptors overall than men do, which means that if I am trying to get most of my high glycemic index carbs from fructose, from fruit, from squeezy pouches, from gummy bears, things like that, it might cause me some bubble guts. It might cause me to have, some gas production and some issues. So pay attention to that. We practice all of this stuff. If you have a competition, we play around with it before your competition, so we know what you can and cannot do, right? So you have a system in place. So sucrose is made up of glucose and fructose, which is why I said the gummy bears. You need to look at foods that have sucrose in them. If you are someone that has discovered you can't eat a ton of fruit, or even like fruit snacks, bananas, squeezy pouches with fruit in it because it causes you digestive issues, then you need to look at the ingredients for processed foods and look to see if it has sucrose in it, because sucrose contains fructose. Very important to know. All right, so we've got our carbs figured out. Again, we're going to talk about in a little bit about playing around with them to figure out your system. What are you going to do for your training sessions? Not talking about competition, just talking about your training sessions. You're going to have 20 to 40 grams of protein before your training session and 40 to 60 grams after. Now, you also need to play around with when you feed yourself these. As a general rule, you want to eat 60 to 90 minutes before your training session if you can. So that means getting into 20 to 40 grams of protein before. And, if you're a morning fitnesser, then eggs are great, or scoop of whey protein. If you are an evening fitnesser, and then maybe you're having, a bagel with some sliced turkey, or, some chicken breast and some rice or something like that. Now, why is there a range? There's a range for a multitude of reasons. If you are only doing a shorter training session, then you don't need as much protein. If you're doing a longer training session, you want more protein. It also goes by how much lean muscle mass you already have on you and by your overall height and weight. So if you're a big girl with a ton of muscle mass and you are going to do a 3-hour session, you want to put more protein in your body before. If you're a leaner, smaller woman and you're doing a shorter training session, you don't need as much protein. It's not a perfect science. These are ranges. You're going to play around with it. And we talk about hormones later in the this phase. But there are times during your period and women who are in perimenopause and post who need more protein. So your luteal phase, you may find that you need to be eating more protein before and after training so that your body has what it needs to recover, because progesterone interferes with muscle growth and stuff. All right, so protein supplements. Branched chain amino acids, essential amino acids, protein powders. I'm a huge fan of those before, during, and after training. Why? Because I'm going to nerd out in a minute on this, but your body has the ability to create glucose from protein. It's called gluconeogenesis. So if you are consuming these things and say your glucose levels run low and you have adequate amino acids, which is what protein breaks down into, then your body has an extra store of glucose. It takes more work to make it, right? So it's not as efficient, but it's kind of a fail-safe. This also helps you recover quickly. So if you're doing 2 lifting pieces and then going and doing a metcon, and you have adequate amount of amino acids in your bloodstream, your body can already start to repair what you've done when you stress the body out doing back squats, because that's how muscle growth works, right? We put the body under load, we break that muscle down, your body's like, oh no, that was too heavy. So it's going to put more, it's going to repair it bigger and stronger so that it's safe. And then we're like, haha, tomorrow we're going to go even heavier, right? And then we keep that cycle, and then we continue to grow muscles. So getting protein before, during, and after training, especially if training sessions, you don't have to have protein during a session that's an hour long, because you will get enough in ahead of time so that your body has what it needs. But if you're going for long training sessions, you want to make sure that you have some intra training as well. And that's where these come in. So you can sip on some amino acids. Now, this is a question I get asked a lot. What is the difference between essential amino acids and BCAAs? And I realize that it's supposed to be EAA and not EEA. I do that all the time. So essential amino acids are all of the amino acids that our body can't produce. So we have to eat food to get those amino acids. Branched chain amino acids are 3 specific amino acids with a branched chain subgroup, I think it's referred to. But for what we're talking about, what they are is they had this thought process, the people who made the BCAA supplements, had this thought process that L-leucine is part of the muscle building group, right? So L-leucine is used to make muscle. So they theorized and did some studies that if you consumed an additional amount of BCAAs, your body had what it needed to make even more muscle. Unfortunately, just like everything else, our body doesn't work with just one thing at a time, right? Like it works in synergy with everything else. So BCAAs have been shown time and time again to not be as effective as they thought that they would be. However, essential amino acids are effective, because essential amino acids are like eating the chicken without all the other stuff from the chicken, right? So you're just getting the amino acids that's in the chicken in a powdered form. So if you want to supplement with something outside of your whey protein, which I like my athletes to have before or after training, sipping on some essential amino acids is awesome. All right, and that's where we come into the how do I know how much I should be consuming? So if you're training for longer than 2 hours, I want you adding in 25 grams of supplemental protein. I like essential amino acids during, because it's the fastest into your system. It's the easiest to digest. Now, there is a little asterisk to this. So it's been shown that when you consume supplemental protein that is broken down and that is very easily available for your body, that we potentially don't absorb all of the protein that we're consuming, because your body only has the ability to process so much at a time, right? So since it's already broken down into that powder form, it doesn't have to go through the digestion process of breaking apart the tissue fibers of the chicken and taking the fat and, taking all of the other nutrients that are with it, and then slowly digesting it. So you eat that chicken and the chicken takes 60 to 90 minutes to empty out of your stomach, versus sipping on some whey protein or some amino acids. It's going to be digested extremely fast. Well, because it's digested so fast, it rushes into your intestines really fast, and then it rushes by the ports, if you will, your little microvilli that take out all those nutrients, and it can't take them out fast enough. So then it rushes past, and then you pee out some of the protein supplement that you consumed. So if you consume it with some whole food, like a banana, you are slowing down the digestion process and giving your body a chance to absorb more of that protein. Okay, and we'll talk about this in the group this week. We'll go through how do you figure out what the best system is for you. All right. I skipped a slide. One of my favorite slides, gluconeogenesis, the process of converting protein into glucose. This is super important for you to understand. So all of our keto friends, right, we've talked a little bit about that so far. The people who are like, oh, keto is the best thing ever, blah, blah, blah. Here's the thing. Your body, your brain requires 50 grams of glucose every day, no matter what. If you don't give your body external supplies of that via carbohydrates, your body is going to make it. If you don't eat adequate amounts of protein, your body, especially the female body, is going to look at all that fun protein that you have stuck on your arms and legs and your abs, because that's what muscle is, right? It's protein. And it's going to go, hey, I need some of that for your brain. I'm going to take it. So we want to always make sure that we have a good supply of protein, that we're eating it, so that our bodies never have to take our muscle to repair the muscle that we broke down or to make glucose, okay? So we always give ourselves adequate amount of carbohydrates. We always give ourselves adequate amounts of protein. And going back to how your body can use this, if you're in a long training session and say you didn't give yourself enough carbs, or digestion is taking longer than it normally does, if you give yourself an additional source of protein mid-training session, then your blood sugar will stay more even keel, because your body has a secondary supply of nutrients that it can use to make glucose. So carbs are our friends for CrossFit. Protein is our backup for everything, right? We always want to make sure we get enough protein. All right, I'm going to skip this slide because I just covered it. And then we are going to talk about what your competitions look like. So competitions, most of the time for us functional fitnessers, are either we have like 2 or 3 metcons in a day, or maybe we have a 3 or 4 day competition. So for we're just going to talk about 1 day blocks, because then you can repeat that over 3 or 4 days. So let's say your first metcon is at 9 a.m., you have another metcon at 12 p.m., and you have another metcon at 3 p.m. How do you figure out how to coordinate your food around those workouts? So breakfast, I want you to eat as normal, and you know what you like to eat because you've played around with it, right? And you have your system. So you're going to have your whole food carbs, you're going to have your whole food protein, and you're going to have some fat. And then you're going to look at what your windows are between your workouts. And we said you had a workout at 9, a workout at 12, a workout at 3. So let's say the first one, 9 to 9:30, right? So now you have 2.5 hours in between that and your second workout. So we're going to try to get you in some more whole foods. And then that will set you up to recover from the first metcon and give you what you need for the second metcon. And then you're going to go compete again, and then we're going to repeat it. We're trying to have you consume whole food protein sources as much as possible with supplements as needed. And again, we play around with this before your competition starts, but we take into account your nervous stomach and how fast food digests. So if you're someone who gets extremely nervous on competition day, maybe you have to err more on the supplemental protein side because you ate the chicken and then it just sits in your stomach. Or because of how nerves affect us, being nervous will actually slow down digestion. So maybe, in a normal time you could eat that chicken breast and not cause an issue, but because you're super anxious, it slows down digestion, and so it sits in your stomach, right? So we want to see how you operate and then play around with it. And we're going to talk about what some foods will look like. So I mentioned chicken breast, veggies and rice, low-fat yogurt and fruit, cottage cheese and fruit, hummus and pita bread. So what you see here is I've comprised a combination of protein, carbs, and I want you to get some healthy stuff in too, right? So I want you to have some veggies and some fruit if you can. And I want it to be whole foods because getting in those nutrients is really important to manage inflammation caused by workouts and caused by stress because you're nervous, because you're competing. So you're going to figure out what can you digest, and you can play around with it. And there's no, I don't tell you not to eat dairy because I think if you digest it, I do think it's okay. You've heard me say this before, but they say, well, we're the only animal that eats another animal's milk. We're also the only animal that goes to college and drives cars and has houses, right? We're a different species, and we figured out that consuming another animal's milk is actually really nutritious for us. So I don't think it's as bad as we make it out to be. And that can be a whole other topic of conversation. All right, so you're playing around with it. You're making sure that you get some whole foods. You're still having easily digested things. And notice that a lot of this is low fat. And I made a point of that because we don't want to have a ton of fat before or after training ever. Why? Because fat slows down digestion. So you need some of it because fat slows down digestion. But if you have too much, then you have this food that's literally sitting in there taking forever to digest. Also, most of the time, fat is not going to be the energy source that we need the most of. So fat is great for steady state. So if you wanted to go for a run and go for 30 to 40 minutes and go at a jog, say, or a rate of perceived exertion of 6, 7 maybe, then your body is going to use mostly fat as fuel while you're running with some carbohydrates. But if you're doing metcons, our bodies use mainly carbs and protein. So we minimize how much fat we eat, but we also want to have some of it. For intra training, you don't want to have any. Before or after training, you want to have 10 to 20 grams. And on competition days, you want to have a little bit because you want to keep your blood sugar even and up. But you don't want to have too much because you don't want to have food sticking in your stomach. Which comes back to this. Fats on comp day. Eat some in the morning and then keep it relatively low throughout the day. And then towards the evening time, you can have more. And I have this little asterisk down here. If you're in luteal phase and you notice that because you're less sensitive to insulin, you have more sugar spikes and you tend to feel hungrier faster, you may need to eat a little bit more fat. And we are going to have a conversation about that starting this week. And we're going to have a conversation moving forward about this, of how different foods impact your training. All right, I know that was a ton. I still have more. I can't wait for this week. I can't wait for your questions. And let me know. Hopefully this all made sense to you. Hopefully I didn't nerd out too much. And I will see you all in the Facebook group.